A big part of being a writer is deciding what to put in and what to leave out. And it's just impossible to put a three-dimensional person on a page or an actual thing that happened. So you're very much using a structure in both cases to make a story, because life isn't a story.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Okay, everybody, so picture this. You write one novel from childhood memories of the 1970s and another from extensive research into the 1800s for Trading Post. Both feature women defying expectations to claim their independence. Today's guest proves that powerful stories about women's freedom can come from any source, memory or archives. On our show today, we're welcoming Cinda Gault, who's going to be talking all about how she moves between personal memory and historical research to create compelling narratives about women who refuse to accept the limitations placed upon them. We're also going to be talking about some amazing writing tips as well, so stay tuned and let's welcome Cinda Gault. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm pleased to be here.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. I think it's going to be a great conversation. But before we dive into your book, I always do like to, kind of get to know you a little bit, kind of where this all came from. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and what drove you to write your first book. Was there a certain catalyst that, made you get the writing bug?
Well, I have always loved school and I was always good at it. So reading and writing were always important to me. And even though I had a fairly tumultuous adolescence, I knew school was in my future and I would do whatever I needed to do to keep going. So that made me wind up doing my undergrad at the University of Guelph in psychology in the 70s. And I was one of those young feminists running around at the time, setting up rape crisis centers and shelters for victims of domestic violence. And so together with a few other women, we set up a university club called Women in Crisis, and we started setting up a distress line. And I became the first executive director to set up a shelter. We brought it downtown, and it's actually going today. And when I finished that project, I decided I had been working with victims for a while, and I would like to go and look at perpetrators. So I became a prison guard at a correctional center that had a maximum security wing, and there they housed inmates who had been convicted of sexual assault crimes or arson or just had mental or emotional problems. And after I did 13 months doing that, I went down to U of T and did my MA in criminology, and my thesis was on domestic violence, and I got the job of my dreams as director of a social service organization and hit a wall. I hated it. And I discovered I do not like managing people. I do not like having to be a mummy to adults and get them to stop talking and doing their jobs. So I recognized that I was at a crossroads and I needed to figure out what I would do that would be deeply meaningful to me. I had learned that anything is going to be difficult to do in the sense that you're going to be having a certain amount of struggle in whatever you do. So what makes that worth it to me? And that was a time in my life when I made three big decisions. And one was that I wanted to be a writer. And I think this was kind of looking back into my youth, how much I was in English. And so writing would be worth a bit of suffering for. And if I was going to do that, I needed to go back to school in English because I was in the social sciences. And, it's a very different way of writing in the social sciences than it is for English. I mean, you can't start a fictional story with a thesis statement because you get whodunit on the first page if that's the case. So I decided I'd go back to school in English. I went on and did another MA, this time in English, caught fire academically, and went on to do a PhD. And did my thesis on Canadian women writers between 1965 and 1980. So that was a whole story. Being a writer, I knew I had to make some kind of money from it. So I decided I would learn how to write a Harlequin romance. I had never read a romance before, but now I consumed them, and that's a whole story. And then I decided I would have my babies. So I had my 2 sons and spent the next basic 20 years having those 2 huge projects on my shoulders. And when they mercifully went off to university and I defended my thesis, I felt like I wanted to be free. I wanted to gallop across the plains with the wind in my hair. And so I started researching the Jesse James gang, because they got to ride horses and they got to do whatever they wanted to. And that was the beginning of my research that became my first historical novel, This Godforsaken Place. And that's a whole story.
Yeah, well, wow, thank you. You kind of went over like every question that I was going to ask
No,
you.
no,
Nice overview. I love it though. That's exactly what we need to get a good background of who you are and what led you to the writing world. That's great. And I think the most important thing for us to take from that is, well, the idea that you were balancing, your children plus your career transition plus the writing. It's a lot of time management and juggling multiple tasks. And I think that's something that a lot of authors listening today could probably benefit from hearing how you made it out, right? So, do you have any certain strategies that helped you, or tips that might help others when it comes to balance all these different?
Well, the first thing I did was I threw out the idea that there was ever going to be any balance. It does not exist. So, without expecting there to be balance, I just fired on all pistons all the time. It was a very exciting time of my life because I had to fire on all pistons to be able to do it all. So at the same time that I was um, intellectually on fire, going to school through all this time, I was also extended to my maximum, both emotionally and physically, with bringing up my kids. So I was on fire on every level, and it made for a very intense life. And that was okay with me because it was extraordinarily fulfilling. I was doing something intellectual, and at the same time, I was doing something that was meaningful to me on an emotional level. So I never expected life to be balanced, and this was just a time in my life when I was just going to have to pull out the throttle and go as fast as I could and just take me out for a ride and see what I could do with myself.
Understood. I like that quote, take me out for a ride, see what I could do with myself. Kind of exploring yourself a little bit in the process of writing this then.
Yeah.
So very cool. And maybe that's a good time to transition into everything I hope for as an example. I mean, because this does come from your memory, other than research, even though you had previous historical works. So let's chat about that a little bit. What made you want to write about the 1970s in particular, and how did that affect your writing process?
Well, I think everything I hope for is going to be the most autobiographic in spirit book that I ever write. So it's loosely based on me, but it is not autobiography because I have twisted and turned and shaped. It's something that I had been writing for the previous 40 years. And you can't just write life because life comes and then that happened and then that happened and then that happened. But a story has much more of a shape to it. So I was that content in search of a shape for that story. And it was the 4th novel that I wrote. The first one was the romance, was the Harlequin. And that was kind of my trial in figuring my apprenticeship really in trying to figure out how to write a story. And then when I did This Godforsaken Place, that was completely research. I had to go back to 1885, know what the world was like then, and think my way into both characters that actually existed, which were a military general, Gabrielle Dumont and Annie Oakley, and then also create fictional characters that would meld with the real characters. And then in a small compass, my 2 main characters were real people. Isabel Gunn, she cut her hair and disguised herself as a man and went off to get hired onto the Hudson's Bay company ship, go across to Canada and work in the fur trade as a man. and Marie-Anne Gabry in Masquinongé, Quebec. She fell madly in love with the coureur de bois. She was not going to be a farm wife. And she got married quickly, and through circumstances beyond his control, he had to go back out west with her. And she discovered why he didn't want her to go out west with him. I'm not going to give that away. And so those two were very much me researching what things were like then. And the person, though, the character, I had to make up because certain things cannot be handed down through time. And I actually, when I first discovered that Isabel Gunn was somebody who existed, I ran out to research her, and I discovered that someone had already written a novel about her. And I read it, and I was shocked at how differently that writer pictured her than the way I did. Because, you know, we both had the facts. This is when she left, this is when she got here, this is when she did this, that, and the other. But as far as what she sounded like and what she cared about and what her secrets were and what her disappointments were, all of those things as a writer about a time that you know, nobody exists now that existed back then, so you have to make it up. Everything I hoped for was different because I didn't research that in the same way because I lived through it. So the times become kind of the water that you swim in, and probably are less accurate because of that, because they're being distorted through memory in many ways. But you get a real sense of how the times smelled and felt and sounded, and, you know, sort of a more sensual experience of the times. And so this was an important story to me. I think it's natural as a writer to want to tell your own story. And so I just had to figure out how to tell a story that was mine to tell from those years.
Understood. Right. So it's a matter of figuring out what exactly, like what parts of it you actually wanted to share with others. I guess that's kind of what it boils down to. And so
well, also, it's impossible to put everything down on a page from life. I would not be able to put down everything that happened. I would not be able to present every aspect of myself. A big part of being a writer is deciding what to put in and what to leave out. And it's just impossible to put a three-dimensional person on a page or an actual thing that happened. So you're very much using a structure in both cases to make a story, because life isn't a story.
Understood. Right. Yeah. So I guess that's kind of how, let's see, the characters, Belinda and John, that's kind of what came of this. Is that correct?
Yes, those are the two
Yeah.
main
Yeah.
characters.
You have like kind of a complex relationship between the two of them. As I was skimming through it a bit. You know, they have part love story, part cautionary tale. You told us a little bit about that, but you know, why did you choose to you know, approach it in such a transformative and ultimately destructive way? What do you think?
Well, there would be several conventions that you would think this kind of story would follow. That it could be a Romeo and Juliet, that because of interventions from the outside world, you have these star-crossed lovers that end up self-destructing because of outside forces. That is not what this story is. You could have another expected kind of story that would be a young woman goes out, she makes her mistakes, she realizes they are mistakes, she goes back home, you know, all the trinkets are still on her shelves, her stuffed animals are still on her bed, and she goes home and she behaves herself and ends up having a more conventional life because she realizes, she learns from the mistakes she makes in that sense. Well, that's not this kind of a story either, because in sort of tune with the 70s, you had real big spike in the divorce rate from 1968 on. So the home had imploded by that time. So there was nothing to come back to. So there's not that kind of expectation of a story. Or you could have a story that, you know, is just everybody gets crushed, her included, and it's not that kind of a story, like a naturalist kind of story. So this story, it breaks those molds. And it is the kind of story apparently I like to tell, because all my stories seem to revolve around it, is a young woman goes out and she learns about life and she figures stuff out, and she accepts responsibility for the choices she makes. And she actually figures out how to have a life that's meaningful to her, no matter what the outside obstacles are. And
Right.
that's the kind of story it is. So that you're referring to a tragic aspect to it, which I am not going to give away. But ultimately, she learns from that, and she learns from it in a way that does not destroy her.
Right, right. And that's kind of what you were alluding to earlier on, I see now. So
Yeah,
I guess all the listeners today have a lot to be curious about and a lot to
I
explore.
hope so.
Well, hey, let's transition a little bit more into a small compass then. You have some really strong characters here as well. But I think it's more for us to talk about the research aspect of all of this. I mean, it's there's got to be a lot that went into it, especially researching, the realities of women passing as a man. Can you share us a little bit about that?
Yes, for sure. Isabel Gunn was a person who really existed. So I was able to get a certain amount about that. But she didn't, I mean, she was just a farm girl in the Orkneys. And the Orkneys were called, those islands were called the Islands of Women, because at the time you had
Okay.
most of the men were away. They either were pressed into Napoleon's wars to fight Napoleon. Young men who would be of the age to go off to the military, or they went off to work in North America in the fur trade. So the women were left to manage the farms, and they were not going to have their own families. They were not going to have their own lives. They were just going to keep on managing the farms. And that was the position that Isabel was in. And her brother was one of the young men who came over to Canada to work in the fur trade. So she knew about it and she knew the stories. And so she decided that she was going to figure out how she could get herself over there. And she did figure that out. So she was not a beautiful looking woman. She was kind of a brick shithouse kind of a woman, but she was very strong, and she was capable of doing anything a man could do because she worked on a farm like a man would. So when she went over to the New World, she was able to keep up with the men and do that work. And I got, as far as the research is concerned, the Hudson's Bay Company keeps great records. So I was able to get the actual captain's manifest for the trip over there. So I knew what happened every day of the journey. I knew what all the employees were doing on the ship as far as their chores and what they were doing. And it kind of gives you chills when you do research like this, because I had the whole manifest of the captain writing out in beautiful calligraphy all the names of the employees he had hired in Stromness. And one of them was John Fubister. And when he was writing out that name, John Fubister, I know it's Isabel Gunn, but he didn't know that when he was writing it out. So it's just, you kind of see history happen there when you can deal with those records. And then I went to the Hudson's Bay Company archives in Winnipeg because they have all the journals kept by, they were called factors. The fur trading posts for the Hudson's Bay Company were called factories, and the person running it was a factor. And they had to write journals every day about what everybody was doing, what the chores were, who was going on this trip, who was hunting, how many geese they were bringing in, whatever it was. And I wanted to find out where Isabel Gunn was when she got pregnant. So there's one little giveaway to the story. And she, so I found out where she was pregnant, and then, and I know where she had her, when and where she had her baby. It was in Pembina. It was Canada at the time. It's North Dakota now. And so that was a whole sort of track of research. And then the other one was for Marie-Anne Gabry, who came from Masquinongé, Quebec. And she married Jean-Baptiste, who ended up being a very big figure. The two of them were kind of the rock stars of the West, the power couple of the West in their own times. So there is stuff written about them. So I followed the story of her out there. But what has not been recorded is that both of these women, the first two non-Indigenous women to go to the wilderness of Canada, ended up at the same place in Pembina, because there was both a Northwest Company fur trading post and a Hudson's Bay post there at the same time, just across the little Pembina River from each other. And they had their babies a week apart from each other. So it's incredible that happened, and there's no record of them having met. So that I have the meat.
Remarkable.
And hijinks ensue, as they say. So I won't say any more about what happens in that story, but it blew my mind when I realized that Isabel Gunn went out there and her story was incredible enough, but that you had another story of a woman she didn't know that wound up same place, same time, having her baby.
That's just amazing that you're able to find all that information out, especially because it's just like it's not readily available. So it takes a lot of digging and you have to.
Yes.
Oh,
Well, where I got the idea of to do that story was when I was researching for this godforsaken place. I just happened to read a journal written by a fur trading post guy who ran it for the Northwest Company. So that was not he was not called a factor, but he was across the street from one, across the river from one. And there was a little asterisk in his journal, and you go down to the bottom of the page where the asterisk is. And he said, something surprising happened tonight. An Orkney lad, and he called him an Orkney lad because the Hudson's Bay Company who were visiting that night were all Orkneys. The Hudson's Bay Company sent over a ship every year to go and hire Orkney young men who were farmers, because apparently they were a lot more complacent and easier to get along with than the British young men were at the time. So they brought the young men over from the Orkneys. They were farmers, they were well behaved, they just did their work and didn't cause trouble. So here was one who was working for the Hudson's Bay Company. They came over for like a Christmas dinner at the fur trading company across the river. And he said, an unusual thing happened. I was called down I was asked by one of the young Orkney lads if he could stay and warm himself at the hearth for a little while. And I said, sure you can, but I'm going to bed. And then someone came and got me and said the Orkney lad wanted me to go downstairs. And I went into the room and he was wailing and in the middle of childbirth. So, and explaining, I'm not who you thought I was. And that's when my mind exploded. I thought, oh my God, there's a story just waiting to be told. And so I ran out to find out who Isabel Gunn was, and I discovered someone else had beaten me to it and had written the novel already. But she saw it in a very different way, and it wasn't until later that I discovered I was just going to write that story about her, and then I discovered Marianne Gabry was in the same place, the same time, and that's just got to govern the story.
right. Well, that's really cool how the story ended up kind of writing itself,
Mm-hmm.
think that's incredible. So yeah, I mean, I love that you kind of let the story just flow with what you found and you find more and more information. And I guess it's inspiring because you never know what you're gonna come up with and where the path might take you. So I think that's something that everybody listening today could definitely learn from too. And that being said, kind of transitioning into the writing process a little bit, what advice would you give somebody if they love that story, they kind of want to follow in your footsteps, maybe find their own historic tale to research? What would you give them as a bit of advice to follow?
Well, I would suggest, first of all, to make a decision about whether or not you want to write a book or you want to be an author, because they're
Okay.
two very different things. They say everybody has a book in them, and that's their own story, and I think that's true. Everybody does have their own story. Not necessarily an interesting one unless you figure out how to write it in an interesting way, which is what I was struggling with for years, for everything I hope for. But if you want to write a book, you want to write your own story or a story, but you just want the experience of writing a book, that's one track, and it's a perfectly legitimate one. And there are things that you can do for help in doing that. You can get a ghostwriter, you can have, hire an editor, you can do all kinds of stuff to shape that book into something that would be a good story.
Understood. Well, thank you so much for walking us through that.
Well, if you want to be an author, it's a different track because you need to accept that it takes a much longer time and you're going to need a day job because you would be disappointed quite early on if you thought that you were going to make a living from it. So two absolutely fine tracks to choose. And I would say that it would be very good for people to just be very honest with themselves about what it is they want.
Yeah, exactly. I see where you're coming from here, and I think it's something that we all need to think about and ask ourselves too. But at the end of the day, if you have an idea for something, you need to get it down. I think the best thing you can do is just
to write too, right? But if you keep pondering, what kind of book do I want to write? Maybe that's another thing to consider also. I'm not sure if that's something that you've ever considered. If you maybe that was something.
Well, I guess it depends on what kind of book you want to write too, because when
Yeah.
I decided I wanted to be a writer and I was going to write my Harlequin,
Mhm.
you do 3 chapters in an outline and send it off and see if you can get invited to send the rest of your manuscript in. And I had done this about 3 times and gotten a different rejection letter back from Harlequin each time. And I was on the verge of doing a 4th one. And I just thought, I can't take just having yet another. And I discovered later they had about 9 form rejection letters that they sent out to authors. So this is not an unusual experience. So I called my local community college where they had a teacher who taught how to write a romance, and she had been an editor at Harlequin before. And I left my number and she called me back, and I hired her to look at it, what I had so far, and see if it was going to get rejected. And she said, yeah, it's going to get rejected. And she knew things that I didn't know about. I had been studying romances, but of course I'm studying ones that are already published. And she said, middle class heroes are out. This was back in the 80s. And she said, Bruce Springsteen is the sexy type these days. So make him a working class hero. So if don't make him an artist, make him a house painter, make him, do something. That's where the timing comes in, the hiring somebody, an editor to help, that sort of thing is very helpful. And then I had her look at my chapters as I wrote them, and that ended up being successful. Now, I did not have that when I did the historicals, because it is not a category in the same way that category romance is. With Harlequin, they had 7 or 8 different lines, and the super romance was one that had to have a subplot in it. So knowing all these things is very important for that kind of a story. But for the historical fiction, it wasn't. It's not published in the same kind of way. So I didn't hire anybody to help me for that. And by that time, I was a more experienced writer. So all of that plays into it as well.
Understood. Yeah, yeah. I appreciate kind of walking us through that path. And so here you are now. You've continued walking the path. You have the books out, and I'm sure there's much more to be excited for. What exactly can we be looking out for in the near future for you and your writer's journey?
Well, the Harlequin that I've been telling you about
Of course.
was called Past
When-
Convictions.
So that is coming up then. Is that correct? Or it's already
Well, it's a weird thing that's happened. That was published in 1988,
okay.
and a couple of years ago they have a reversion of rights program. So you can apply to get your rights back, and if Harlequin does not have a plan to do anything with it, they'll just give you rights back. So I applied and I got them back. And my current publisher said she was interested in publishing it again 36 years later. So I went through and revised it, because I had phone booths and landlines and tape recorders, and there were no computers, there were no cell phones, because I wrote this on a manual typewriter back in the 80s. So I needed to update it. I updated the names, but I was very pleased that I didn't have to do anything with the actual romance. Apparently people fall in love now the way they always did, but they do it with different technology. So it is like right now, over the next week, is going to be re-released as a new novel, and Harlequin owned the cover, so I couldn't use that. So my current publisher has done a new cover for it, and the story is different in the sense that it's in contemporary times as opposed to the 80s, but it's just about to get a new life. And then also within the next year, I'm doing a children's story.
Okay.
It's called Beak the Clown, and I wrote it for my son when he was little. He's in his 30s now, and he was afraid of clowns. So the whole idea is kind of metaphorically confront your fears, and they're not as scary as they would otherwise have been. So that's something that's coming out. And I'm spending most of my time these days marketing and learning how to be a marketer, because apparently that's what writers have to do these days. So I know the next book that I want to write, but between that and my 2 granddaughters who were born in 2023, I'm having to fight for my writing time all over again. I fought my kids for my writing time, and now I'm having to
Mm.
fight my grandkids for it. But it keeps it fresh and important to me.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, hey, you got to find the right time, right? I get it. So thank you for walking us through that and seeing, what's more on the horizon. Very exciting about the children's book for sure. But if we want to stay up to date and know exactly, when these are going to come out and be in the know, what's the best links to head to?
Well, I would say just go to my website, cindagault.com. If you Google my name, you'll get all of my social media stuff. And I can put you, if you leave me your email address on my website, I can keep you up to date. I can also send people a webinar series that I did. It's 10 videos that are 10 minutes long each. It's free. I just give this away. And it's the story of genre, how genre in the English language developed over time, starting with romance and what happened and how writers developed all the genres that we just kind of take for granted now. We're talking about a romance, we're talking about a historical, these are all things that were invented. They didn't just come out of nowhere. They were invented by writers, and the story of how that happened is quite interesting. So people can also get that from my website.
Okay. Well, hey, we got to head there to find this, don't we? Really cool. Thank you for showing us that. We're gonna put the links in the description box of this podcast today, so we can all click on over and learn a little bit more. Um, so as we begin to wrap up, then I'm wondering if you have any last bits of advice that you'd like to share with the audience today. Anything for them to hold on to as they continue on with their day?
Well, I would just say that life is exciting and fascinating, and never lose sight of that. And ultimately, you are figuring out what you can do irrespective of what happens in the world. And I would also suggest that people not lose sight of the fact that readers are very important. People don't read as much as far as full-length books anymore as they did. So people who are reading and are good readers and insightful readers, they're extremely important, and writers depend on them.
Right, exactly. So I love that. Yeah, that's exactly what people need to hold on to as they continue on with their day. Um, Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure to, learn a little bit more about you and learn about the balance between, the personal side of writing and the research side of writing. And I think it's really cool that you kind of stumbled upon a lot of this stuff in a way, between your own just research and experiences. So, kudos to you. It all came out really great. And guys, you can check out these books anywhere their books are sold, right? Amazon, and then the links in the description
Yes.
box. I'm gonna put Cinda's website there. Sorry, go ahead.
My publisher is greygoosepress.com. You can also get them there. But also, just going on what you're saying here,
Yeah.
how I stumbled on much of this, that's what makes it exciting. It's a discovery. You don't have to have everything figured out ahead of time. As you go through, one thing will lead you to another. And you can discover your story as you write it. And it makes it for a very exciting experience.
It is, right. Yeah, no, thank you for that. You're right. It's about discovery and finding yourself and finding your writing passion. So yeah, guys, that is an amazing. It's been a great honor to have you on today. Thank you for talking about, just having the courage to keep going and reinventing yourself. So hopefully we're all inspired by Cinda's story today. Whether you're also a seasoned professional looking to share your story or someone contemplating a change in life, remember that your experiences, even the difficult ones, can become the foundation for something beautiful. And if this conversation resonated with you, check out the links in the description box of this podcast. Visit authorsonmission.com to learn how we can help you also turn your knowledge into lasting impact. And with all that being said, Cinda, thanks again for joining us. It's a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. It's the same with me.
All right. And everybody else, keep writing, keep reading, keep inspiring. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.